Good evening. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. This is episode 83, and tonight we continue our exploration of the films from the Oscar season of 50 years ago. That's 1974. And tonight's film is the first foreign language film from 1974 that we're discussing, Alice in the Cities, from director Wim Wenders. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzel, one of your hosts here for the evening, and I've got a couple of co-hosts that are going to discuss this movie with me tonight. First, ladies and gentlemen, she's a gadabout freelance journalist who is forced to take care of an ill-mannered young girl. Ladies and gentlemen, Talia Rinka Mostow is here with us.
Hi.
And ladies and gentlemen, another new addition to the No Name Cinema Society, abandoned by his wife and 2 children today, so we have to deal with him for the next hour or so. Andy Nordvall is here.
Yeah, just drive me to my grandparents, man.
Where do they live, though, Andy? That's what I don't understand. Where are your grandparents? So,
all right. Chicago. We'll just drive around. And
there you go.
Happens, you know?
And that reference, ladies and gentlemen, is something we were talking. Andy and Talia have never met. Talia's in Chicago. Andy's here in Los Angeles with me. So that's what that reference is about, referencing Chicago. Before we get into the movie, guys, some quick notes on tonight's opening and closing song that we started with. Tonight's song uses a circus metaphor to paint a portrait about modern-day romantic relationships. It's called Sideshow from the group Blue Magic, and it was the 19th biggest song of 1974. It's a catchy tune. And the last thing before we get started is the tidbit I sometimes drop in the early part of the shows. Fans of the show may recall when we studied the films of 1988, the film I named as should have been nominated for Best Picture was Wings of Desire, of course, from tonight's director, Wim Wenders. On a later episode, I also named it as the 3rd best film of 1988, and it currently stands as my 106th favorite film of all time, which isn't too bad, all things considered. Tonight's film, Alice in the Cities, is the 4th feature film in his career, but he feels it was the first one that wasn't derivative, that suggested what he can do as a director. And we'll see in a moment if the panel thinks it was successful. So now moving on to summary, Alice in the Cities. Freelance German journalist Philip has a chance encounter in an American travel office with a young mother from his own country and her 9-year-old daughter. They spend some time together before their shared flight back home, but Philip wakes up the next day to find a note from the mother asking him to escort young Alice back to the homeland, and she will meet up with them later. Needless to say, the troubled mother never shows, and Philip is tasked with traveling to find someone to claim the sudden orphan. Okay, that's the summary, and now we move on to opening thoughts. And so for the audience's sake, for Andy's sake, since he's a newcomer, this is one sentence. We're basically looking for, did you like the film and why, in one sentence or less, just to get a sense of it, and we'll dig into it a little bit later. So since she's the veteran, I'll let Talia go first. Talia, what'd you think of this film?
I actually loved it.
Nice.
I was unsure at the beginning. I knew nothing about this movie. For the first 10 minutes, I was a little angry with you. I thought I was up early, 6 a.m, watching a sad German film, and then it changed, and I loved it so much, and I actually watched it twice. I liked it so much.
Okay, cool. That's probably a few more sentences than we would like, Andy. So you know it's not a great example of what we hope for in opening thoughts. So see if you can be a little more brief. Andy, what did you think? One sentence.
I too loved it, although not a 6 a.m. type of movie. I'll say that.
Okay, and for my opening thought, I would say it was mostly good, but not quite as great as fans might expect. So some general agreement, but it seems like I'm the one that liked it the least, and I really liked it. But these guys are a little more effusive than I am. And in terms of our discussion, I'm going to start with performance. Talia was part of the episode where I ranked the top 5 child performances of all time. Do you remember that, Talia? You have no recollection of this whatsoever. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I get proof. It was episode 51.4, I think. So it's out there on YouTube. You can check it out for yourself. It really happened. And I kept thinking about how this film, Alice in the Cities, could be an interesting companion piece with Paper Moon, which came out the year before. He actually saw Paper Moon 2 weeks before shooting started on this film, and he wanted to cancel it because he saw all the similarities. There's so many parallels between the two films, with possibly an even better child performance. Yellow Rotlander is uniquely natural and does so speaking 2 different languages. There is this extra layer, possibly by accident, of her knowing things without really knowing the details, like how she seems to know that her mother is not returning without completely comprehending it or why. Or when her de facto guardian has a private tryst in the other room, she can't seem to quite wrap her head around her feelings, so she plays this muted jealousy, disguising it with an invented urgency to leave. These are the kind of nuanced layers that adult actors struggle with. For her to reach that level of detail, I thought was particularly impressive. So let's start with Talia here. Talia, what do you think of Yella Rotlander?
I watched Paper Moon today.
Because of this film?
Yes, like I really was surprised at how much I liked this movie, and it made me think about Paper Moon. It made me think about Come On from a few years ago, so I rewatched that as well.
Which also made my top 10 of that year. I think it was 2021.
Yeah, and all the kids, I think in all three movies, they're supposed to be about 9 years old. Of the three, this ranked middle, so higher than Paper Moon. I thought she was wonderful.
Yeah, I wasn't sure because it's like he's deliberately telling them not to sort of to keep it underneath. But she has, but the moments where you do see little flashes of personality, like where she gets jealous after the tryst, or in the photo booth scene, which I just absolutely adored. They're even more powerful because we do have these long stretches where they're just sort of like stewing, and you know there's stuff going on in there, but you don't know what it is.
I think your last sentence is the key one. There is stuff going on under there, and that's something you generally don't see in child performances. Like, maybe I'm grading on a curve a little bit, but it does feel like an adult level performance from that point of view. Like, I feel like this girl is playing layers. Knowing how difficult that is to work with actors that are minors, that level of detail is impressive.
Yeah.
More layered than Tatum O'Neal, who is great and beautiful on screen, and I want to watch her, and I enjoy watching her. But I agree. I think this performance was more layered. The second time I watched it, I had completely different ideas about what she was thinking during different scenes than the first time I watched it.
And maybe that speaks to what Andy was saying, is like, he was saying he doesn't know what's going on. I had theory, but that's part of the fun of it, interpreting what you think this actor is doing. And a lot of that has to do with direction, and we'll certainly get to our boy Vim in a bit. In terms of Rudiger Vogler in general, I feel like he's relaxed and he's real. I personally felt like he registers the occasional false moment that feels like forced acting, where she seems to float through this movie as if she were living it, oblivious to the cameras almost. Like, to me, there's an occasional self-consciousness to his performance that took me out of the narrative and doesn't seem to match the girl's naturalism. And I don't know if that speaks to your conflict at all. It sounds like your conflict is more as like you weren't always able to read him. And it is true that it is up to the actor to communicate something to you. The old saying is less is more. But there are times when less is not enough. Like, totally.
We got a lot more less in this. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seemed very much a conscious choice, both on his part and Wim Wenders' part. How much do I flaw them for, like, they did strive to give him this opacity that was, like, at times off-putting, but very much, they don't want the typical Hollywood sentimentalities.
Until they do, which is a whole other thing, which I'll get to. But I will.
Yeah, that's true.
However, and this is where Rudiger is at fault, I think, is there were moments, and Vim for maybe not calling it out or not redoing her take or choosing a different take. There are moments where I just stopped believing he was Philip. There are moments that did not feel real. Not many, enough. And like I said, where he felt self-conscious. You know what I mean? Like, where all of a sudden he felt like an actor instead of everyone else in the film. You talked about the French New Wave, and what's unique about that, or was unique when it debuted, is that it felt like real life, the real life motion, almost doc style kind of people living in these worlds. And a lot of this film does that, and except there are moments where he sort of takes me out of it, like 4 or 5, I'm not calling it a bad performance, but enough, especially when contrast with what she was doing, which to me felt revelatory. Talia, Rudiger Vogler.
Yeah, I think at the beginning, there were 2 moments when I was wondering why I was watching this film at 6 a.m.
Don't blame me for the 6 a.m. thing. That was a choice that you made.
I had to fit it in, and that's when my house is quiet. But it felt almost like a student film. Like, there was something that felt a little forced. It was like there was a beat that went on a little too long, and then he'd react. And I thought maybe these are choices that are being made, or something wasn't feeling good. And then I got very into the movie, very comfortable with the performance. But then at the end on the boat, I had like a moment of feeling like it was a little phony again. Never with her, but with him, where something didn't feel authentic for the movie that felt like it was meant to be very authentic.
Very much in line. I'll even give you the old bingo for that one, because that's very much in line with how I'm feeling about his performance. Like, it's not like it did. I like the movie very much, But if we're if we're breaking things down like we're supposed to do in the show, that sort of stands out to me. The girl's excellent performance, at least from my point of view, might have something to do with Wim Wenders and DP Robbie Mueller adopting a doc or verite style. Not completely, but it seems in keeping with the character's journalistic endeavors. They still manage to find captivating image after captivating image and completely devoid of manipulation from my point of view. The events just happen to pass by the frame. I was particularly impressed with how, once again, Wenders managed to make the environment such a vital character in the piece. Whether it's Berlin in Wings of Desire, Tokyo in Perfect Days, Texas in Paris, Texas, and here there's cross-country USA, New York, Amsterdam, and then the Ruhr region of Germany. Most filmmakers that dare to do that lose sight of the story in those moments, but Wenders wisely is able to fold the travelogue into the narrative, creating balance. One note I have is that while I enjoyed the music at first tonally for the story, it never evolved or changed like some of the stylistic elements like Andy was talking about. So the music became an unpleasant, grating nuisance, ultimately.
Oh, yeah, the incidental. I liked his choice of pop song. That one theme that just kept playing. Yeah, I was like, oh, yeah, that got a little grating.
But beyond the music, I talked about the verite style, and I talked about the how his connection, how he makes the setting, the place, a character in the piece. So, Andy, I'll let you go first.
Yes, I love the way it was shot. It reminded me a lot of Tarkovsky, the very sort of long takes that take everything in that it takes a while to get used to, but it makes you like look at the scenery, and also that fascination with modern, like, it's not the great sweeping, beautiful landscapes, the strip malls and the 76 and the gas stations that just gets shot. It's weird. It's a beauty in the what is usually very sort of crass and ugly, which I thought was really cool. But I think all of the early shots, it's all one shots. You almost never see two people in the same shot until he gets stuck with Alice, and then it's like all two shots, him and Alice, which I thought was an interesting choice.
I also only watched it once, so I did not notice that. But that is an interesting. It is interesting. I wonder if it was appropriate. Like, if that is the case, I almost would prefer that to happen once he gets to know Alice, or you know what I mean, or maybe like a third act kind of thing to sort of highlight his journey, and we'll talk about that when we get to screenplay. But if it was a choice, it was too soon, because he doesn't change right when he meets Alice. Like there needs to be a journey.
It evolves because like originally he's stuck with Alice, and he literally suddenly has to share the frame with Alice.
Oh, okay, all right,
yeah.
I'll have to think about that a little further if it's a choice, because if the frames were claustrophobic, that might make sense to me. And I don't remember feeling that way. Usually when we put characters in a frame together, it's about connecting them emotionally. And you're saying it's almost like making them feel trapped with each other. And if that's the case, then there shouldn't be as much negative space. Like, again, I'm sort of thinking like a director, perhaps inappropriately, but that's what strikes me. Talia, first, what do you think about what we're talking about in terms of...
Yeah, I didn't catch that. I mean, I'm thinking back now, and I'm thinking maybe that's right, that's the first time there's two people together, but I'm trying to think. I don't know if it happens right away. I think that I thought a lot about how it was filmed. Philip seemed so uninspired by America, but so much of the sort of like photography, like his Polaroids are not particularly beautiful, but then we're seeing really beautiful images. I loved the dollar bill coming out the window at the toll booth. I loved seeing the trains in New York, and then we see the trains later in Europe. Yeah, he has that awkward meeting with a woman from his past, right? And they are so distant for that whole scene. That was maybe one of the scenes that I thought the writing was so good, but it also was so uncomfortable, and he just starts getting naked. I think it was very effective because I think I was meant to feel very uncomfortable.
I was thinking about what Andy was saying too. Like, one of the first things I thought about when he said that was that scene, and because I remember a lot of moving camera in that scene, but I also remember that it didn't, like, any time that the camera did put both of them in a frame, one of them moved out of the frame. So that does seem to be in keeping with what Andy was saying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Andy, you had wanted to connect this film to Wim Wenders' other work, as I recall. Now's the time if you wanted to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's funny. I think not entirely accurately, but to think of it as like a practice run for Wings of Desire. It's got that same odd structure of just this guy wandering around observing stuff, and then finally someone pulls him into actual human interaction. Now, in Wings of Desire, it's an active choice, whereas here he just kind of gets stuck with it. Less stuck and as broken free of the observer role by the end of the movie. Now, Wings of Desire, it's angels, and in this one, it's writers.
Yeah. Huge consequences in Wings of Desire for him to make that conscious choice.
Yeah.
But I mean, the wandering around, observing, definitely I noticed. The observational aspect of it does feel connected to the setting. Like I sort of folded that into what I was saying about the cities, because what he's observing is a place and people within a place and their connection to a place. Well, did anybody see Perfect Days from last year? Wim Wenders' most recent film?
No, I haven't seen that. But a lot of his films have both a fascination with observation and how it's always distorted. People who are stuck, and often stuck in a role where they just can observe and aren't actually participating.
It's not always the observers that are stuck. If you look at Wings of Desire, like the trapeze artist was also to some degree stuck. And you could argue Peter Falk was stuck, on some level in Wings of Desire. So like, it's not just the observers,
Also, Until the End of the World has this, and not entirely successful, this late stretch where like they're getting these weird distorted images from their own dreams, and they get trapped by them and they're just stuck watching them for days and days and days, and they can't even eat. That sort of reminded me of Philip's attachment to his Polaroid, of just like how the attempt to perfectly capture an image is ultimately futile and can just sort of ensnare you into this like passive thing where you just can't move forward, where you're stuck in place.
Andy's mentioned this a little bit, as has Talia. And so I'm going to sort of address something that they've sort of hinted at, that for all the film's artistic merit and esoteric Euro cachet, the script itself, to me, feels very Hollywood, which aligns with the idea that Wenders' films historically seem to straddle both of those worlds nicely. The story is the typical odd couple situation, thrown together by circumstance and on a mildly contrived mission of some kind. We already referenced Paper Moon, It's a twist on the old child left on a doorstep motif. And I mentioned the contrivance because at a certain point, his avoidance of institutional help, like the police, feels highly dubious, if not full-on disingenuous. He eventually dips his toe in that river, but not completely. The story wasn't quite done yet, so Wenders and his team tested our suspension of disbelief there. In its third act, it either strays from Hollywood territory or didn't execute it properly, because I'm not sure either character has enough of an arc, at least from Hollywood standards. I suppose she brings out his previously non-existent parental side a little bit, but it only sort of tangentially kind of connects to his career aspirations and financial problems. In other words, their little adventure feels like it should have inspired him to make some sort of a change in his own circumstances instead of just a shrug. Also, the details surrounding the absent mother and potential consequences are blatantly ignored. I suppose one could argue they don't matter in terms of the Philip-Alice relationship, but they are important enough details to be distracting from the primary thrust. At least that was my experience. I've got two writers on the panel with me tonight, so I'm interested to what they have to say. Talia, screenplay.
Yeah, at first I think I was a little bothered by the ending. The first time I watched it, I mean, it sort of wraps up really fast. How long had the cop been there? He just happens to be on the boat.
He just happens to be on the ferry.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell what the conflict was between the two men. If the cop was a little bit like, I caught you, and he was like, oh, we've been here. And then, we don't really know what happens. Are the consequences for the mother? But ultimately, I think what the story was doing was telling us that Philip was maybe not too changed by this experience. Maybe in some ways. It was when I went through the second time, there's a line early on where he looks at the Polaroid and he says, like, it's never what it looked like. Maybe this was like that too, though I think the Polaroid that he takes of the girl maybe gets as close to what he's feeling. Maybe it doesn't look like what it feels like.
And it might have been a conscious effort to move away from Paper Moon, because like they actually did rewrites in the 2 weeks after he had 2 weeks before production and scrambled to make it somehow different. So
they both have these pictures at the end. It was funny. There were sort of a few things. I could not believe how close together they came out.
Neither could Wim Wenders.
The ending felt a little rushed, and I thought, okay, it's that he doesn't have much of an arc ultimately. He is going to move on with his life. I don't know.
The theory then is that you notice the lack of an arc, like me, but you felt like that was the point. Like
this is what he does. The woman that he had that night with, she sort of says that, like, you don't really know who you are, and we're all just trying to figure this out. I think he keeps going to people hoping that they're going to help him figure out who he is, and ultimately he's hoping this 9-year-old girl is going to tell him who he is. And I think there are things gained in that experience, but I'm not sure he does walk away changed, because the work is something he has to do within himself. It's nothing that anyone can give him.
Right. And it's not that, she would give it to him, but she might like light a fire. I can understand failed arcs, but I mean, like, so much of it was setting up for that I did feel like it was almost, if it was a purposeful failed arc, it was disingenuous to some degree. In other words, like, I feel like it was such a long period of time that they spent together. His life was in such a clearly dire place that it felt like, like if they did it on purpose, it was almost to be anti-Hollywood after being so Hollywood for large portions of the movie, but not, the narrative felt like it needed a little something. I don't need like a whole 180. I just want a little sense that he's just learned something, and not that I'm super Hollywood. I felt like the narrative earned that, and to not give me that, it didn't feel right within what they were building.
I do think we see him start writing. Sorry. So like,
he does start writing.
Completely blocked, but then once he's with her. So I do think she opens up something in him, and that she changes maybe who he is as an artist, allows him to see the world around him differently, but I don't think it changes him as a person. I actually think those two things are different.
Yeah, he starts writing again, like, I think it does show a change. Well, two changes. One, he writes again, he couldn't write at all. He was just taking the pictures, and he's writing. And
I have a vague recollection of the writing, but I mean, like, I didn't feel like that was either enough, or, to Talia's point, any sort of like character change or anything like that. I don't know. Like,
I thought it was very subtle, but it was there. One, he's writing. Two, like, you sense he is starting to connect with his homeland a little bit.
Okay,
Don't go to
that's
America
something I did not sense. I did not get that impression.
Because we get those long, beautiful scenes of like the German thing and him sort of interacting with.
I didn't get much from a reaction, and we talked about this performances, but I didn't get much from those reactions. Like, he seemed nonplussed, really, if anything.
Okay. Yeah, it's weird because he's also sad that like all the old houses are getting knocked down, which is interesting because in other places there seems an embrace of modernity. But also he learns to feel a little bit of joy. And I really loved the last scene where like they're both just looking at the train window, and it's the first time we've seen him just glowing happy, Some very different interpretations of the ending there, but I certainly did not feel satisfied by the arc. It didn't feel like it landed for me, but it's that's why we do these shows. We've agreed a lot on a lot of different other things, it seems. But it sounds like some wildly different interpretations of the third act. It's really where I saw the connection with the French New Wave, where it's this wonderful almost paradox of like, they'll make these very anti-Hollywood, very experimental films, but just because you need some structure, they'll like graft on the most typical Hollywood story onto it, just so you have something. It's very much, biting the hand that feeds you.
It wasn't so much old Hollywood. It was current Hollywood that they were really rebelling against. It was the old Hollywood that they really admired, like the Howard Hawks and
and John Ford in this one.
Yeah, that they were the ones that came up with the auteurist theory, obviously, and Hawks and Ford are the people that were really lifted by, and they were film critics, those French New Wave guys. So you see elements of those films. For all their hatred, they loved that old Hollywood. You mentioned French New Wave a couple times. That's what Wenders was trying to distance himself of, at least in his comments.
Really?
Clearly didn't. It was just a part of him, But his concern heading into this film was that his previous films were too derivative. Like one was too Hitchcock, the other was too French New Wave, and so he wanted to make something that only he could do, is the way he put it. It still feels like a mix of Hollywood, French New Wave. Like, there's elements of all those influences are there. Maybe the combination is what he is. But all right, so we're going to move on to the most popular section, Talia's favorite section. Talia, what do we call it?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
She's a veteran. She can't remember the T word. This is where we talk about the themes of the film. Our founding member, Drunk Davey, he didn't like to talk about themes. He said it made watching the film feel like homework, but the rest of us did. So we danced around it, called the T word. The segment was born. The one that's on the surface here is one that we've talked about a lot on previous shows, like, for example, our review of Captain Fantastic. It's the responsibility of the entire community to the next generation. Parents are the first line of defense and ultimate arbiters, but it takes a village to pitch in and shape the minds and emotions of the youth of the world. Philip is essentially a stranger to Alice, but is inherently reluctant to abandon her like most people might, even if it is to the authorities. He has no experience with children, seems never to have flirted with serious commitment to a job or a woman, let alone fatherhood. And yet he feels compelled to protect, nurture, and even teach this little lost lamb, tapping into parental qualities that may have even surprised himself. He struggles and loses himself naturally, as any biological parent might, but those intrinsic instincts always come back to the surface and set things back to center. That lies in sharp contrast, of course, to the mother who abandoned her child, but I think that speaks to how underestimated the challenges of parenting can be. Lisa was clearly not ready to be a mother and seems to not have truly understood the full weight of the role. I'm inferring there, but that's not to suggest that she shouldn't have had the child, and if it was indeed an accidental conception, as we all inferred, I wouldn't want to imagine a world without Alice. However, somewhere along the line, sooner than the child growing to age 9, she needed to recognize that her own wants and needs no longer mattered, and be self-aware enough that she was not ready to cope with that reality. Easier said than done, of course, but I think her behavior and Philip picking up the slack serves as a reminder that once a child enters the picture, they become the priority. In the beginning, Philip seemed lost or stuck, and I suspect he would find some purpose after his dealings with Alice. But if that was the intention, and we talked about this a little bit, I'm not sure it fully materialized. I have 2 parents on the panel today, so I'm curious how do they respond to all this. So I've got child rearing as my first of 3 themes. Talia?
Yeah, I think the word that kept coming up for me is privilege, in the sense that like it's a privilege to be around a child, actually. I do think she inspires him. She brings joy to his life. There's a silliness that it seems like he's been missing. I teach kids too. I teach kids right around this age. And they do bring sort of a weird kind of magic, and it doesn't mean it's not exhausting, and everything else that goes with it, and the endless snacks. They're always hungry. But also, if you are sort of open to it, it's a really wonderful little window into something that if you don't have children in your life, I think you don't get to experience. This and Paper Moon and Come On are also interesting because it's all men with children, which is different than just a random woman finding them. I think it's pointing to caretaking and whether or not motherhood is more natural than fatherhood, and maybe not. I don't know.
It may be because in all of those movies, the male does not take to it right away as naturally. But in this movie, neither does the woman, right? Like
absolutely,
her biological mother is not equipped yet either. So maybe that's interesting. But it sounds like what you got from the film is also child rearing related. But I agree with a lot of what you said. Do you feel like Philip saw it as a privilege?
I mean, I think maybe in different ways than I see it as a privilege. I think he frankly really enjoyed that he was able to pick up the woman in the park using the child.
That doesn't count. That's not the privilege you were talking about.
Just to say, forgive me, but like Paper Moon, that's also like a weird privilege to like have the child who can help you get more money. I think having a child is a privilege in lots of weird ways.
But he does sort of pick up the slack here. There is a responsibility, even if it's not parental, but it is a responsibility to the next generation to some degree. Like he just can't let this person be on their own. When he does leave her, he leaves her to the authorities, which some would argue he should have done in the beginning, before he got attached to her or what have you. Andy, child rearing in Alice in the Cities.
It's funny. I was sort of resistant to your argument, but then it won me over because there is like that great scene where it's like, tell me a story. And at first he's like, no. And then he's like, oh, shoot, I screwed up. Okay, here's the story. And he doesn't really abandon her. He's even like, he's on the train with her. Like we don't see, very importantly, the movie ends before they have to separate. Like he's still watching out for her at the end.
I'm very relieved that I won somebody over with an argument. It's very rare that happens. I'll give myself a bingo. Like I feel thank you.
Well, I mean, they're also, it seems the adults in this are kind of a little arrested too. Like there are moments when Philip is very childlike. Like their first interaction is when they're playing in that revolving door.
It's commitment phobia to some degree. Again, whether to be to a job, like certainly my lack of commitment to a job or a woman has led to many people calling me childish.
He's still kind of emotionally stunted because he hasn't connected with his kid, and he sort of learns to be a kid, ironically, by having to be a parent to a kid.
You could argue that Paper Moon as well. And also emotionally stunted is also what Talia calls me all the time. I've got another theme here, and then we'll see if I win you over with this one. And, like Talia thought about privilege, I kept thinking about this a little bit. There does seem to be something even larger than child rearing about compassion/empathy and the way that that's constantly tested. I say that because while Philip and Alice is the film's primary relationship, their interactions with the rest of the world on their travels shows a wide array of behavior respective to their situation. It seems to me that the film's conceit is that the world is mostly filled with people that are good by nature, but there are limits to how much of themselves they are willing to give. Even Philip's ex displayed some empathy, practically forcing herself to remain cold and rigid with him, having reached the end of a rope, perhaps justifiably, but still. The woman Philip sleeps with, the police, a lot of people they encounter see their human interest levels challenged. You can even throw Lisa into that group, though obviously her reaction was extreme, but she also hit a wall and decided she needed to think of herself. It's possible she rationalized it by thinking that if she patched things up with this guy, maybe that would help her and Alice long term. But as outsiders, we can see that there's no real justification. And so for me, this road movie paints a portrait of a modern world, modern for 1974, obviously, that doesn't exactly lack compassion, but that may stop when sacrifice becomes involved. At the film's second plot point, Philip also gets fed up, maybe even understandably. After all, it kind of really isn't his problem. But his ultimate decision to accept the responsibility again suggests a glimmer of hope for us all. I had trouble explaining it as a theme, but it was constantly in my mind as I was watching this film. So that's why I wanted to bring it up. Andy.
Yeah, well, it's interesting in a historical context too, because I mean, Philip and all the other adults would have grown up in the 1950s, and you can sort of see why German parents in the 1950s might not have been in a good place emotionally. You know what I mean? Like, and I think at the time, like, they were rebuilding the society, and there was this great focus on like, we've got to rebuild. There was no sense of fun. There was no sense of play. You have this generation that's lost, that has very little sense of its identity. But where you find hope is like the next generation that like didn't have to deal with parents who were dealing with the fact their country turned into a monster for like 10 years. You know what I mean?
How does that relate to the compassion thing?
The ex-girlfriend says like, you know, we're all lost. And I think a lot of the movie is him being lost, but realizing like maybe there's hope in the future and that we've got this other generation coming up that can leave that painful history behind us. You know what I mean?
Thinking that I had sort of a different read originally on the moment where you said Alice is jealous that he's in bed with a woman that they make friends with. And I didn't necessarily feel that. I mean, I do think she felt lonely, but there was something really beautiful about, I thought, her coming to get him and the way that they were whispering to each other. It was really intimate and lovely. He could see that she needed him more than whatever he wanted. That was more important. I think that was one of the moments that I saw.
I don't mean jealous romantically, but I do feel like jealous from the point of view that she wasn't getting the attention. You're seeing that moment as a moment where he started to feel empathetic to what was going on with the child. Is that what you're arguing?
I think there's like subtle things, you know, like, again, the food, but she's hungry all the time, right? And she's wondering how he has money. And he very subtly says he's been selling things, you know, so they can sort of keep going, or they stay at a nicer hotel. Maybe it's guilt, not empathy. I don't know.
Why would it be guilt for him? Because like, I think a lot of us have said that we felt that maybe he should have turned her over to the authorities to begin with. So why would he feel guilty? Or is it because he spent so much time with her at that point?
No, I think he knows that he's getting something out of this, that he knows that he's almost using her a little bit for this adventure.
He's so directionless. I think part of what he gets out of it is like, finally he has something to do, which might explain, like, you know, it's the flimsiest of things of like, oh yeah, my grandma, I'm pretty sure she lives in this city. Okay, let's just go there and see what, you know. Like, he just needs to do something. He never stops to say, this is the dumbest
and
plan
that spirit
ever.
That spirit incidentally does seem to appear a lot in the films from, you know, we studied 1970, now we're studying 1974. That spirit, that pre-spontaneity kind of spirit does seem to pop up a lot. It felt like an energy of the time. I wasn't disconnected from that. Like, I bought that enough anyway. I got a final theme that might be kind of a stretch, and it's sort of stemming from what we've talked about, Wenders' milieu in general, and the aforementioned attention to setting it and place. So thematically, this is something that was outside the narrative, but it occurred to me that the titular cities in countries halfway across the globe started to blend together a little bit, which likely would not have been the case 20 years prior to this film. To me, this speaks to the emerging globalization of our planet. The concept of borders being more and more of a fading human construct than a reality, a trend that has continued beyond Wenders' wildest dreams in a modern world that has 6,000 miles a click away. A large majority of the characters are bilingual, and the shot choices seem to echo each other from one city to another. The cities are still distinct, hardly carbon copies, but their influence on one another and their respective citizens seem to pop up through the architecture and the fashion. And also, emotionally, as the aforementioned compassion and concern for the next generation does seem to transgress borders. So this idea is also kind of furthered in the film's style, which I mentioned earlier, which feels like a hybrid between American and European cinema, adding to the sense that it may just be a small world after all. Andy, globalization in Alice in the Cities.
Well, they make a good point where they talk to the old couple, and it's like, oh yeah, all the old houses are getting knocked down for new houses,
and the new houses are starting to look like houses that maybe they had in America, or
yeah, they all look alike. Yeah, which is a bit ambivalent of globalization, although it's sort of weird because it's like I think we see more Coca-Cola signs in Europe than we did in America. Everywhere.
Didn't we see at least one in America? Like I'm seeing these echoes.
Yeah,
like
they're everywhere in the thing.
Advertisements. It's not as baked into the narrative. It's more like this theme seems to be just about the mise en scène to some degree. Talia.
No, I think I said earlier that one of the things that I really loved was the images of the trains in America and then the trains in Europe. And these are cities evolving. It's happening everywhere. I guess I wasn't thinking about the larger theme of it when watching the movie, but now I'm into that idea. Yeah.
Now I convinced you of something? Is that possible?
Yes.
He's got a lovely ambivalence towards it, just like he's ambivalent towards American culture. Because like he's sensing we're losing something, but he shoots like the cityscapes and the ads so beautifully. Like he sees a beauty in the modernity, even while he's sort of worrying about the generic globalization that's going to happen.
Time for closing thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. So let's see. Andy, it's your first show. How do you feel?
Yeah, great. Watch more foreign movies. Be open to slower movies. Like I think it's good.
Are you talking to me or the audience?
Yeah, the world. I'm going to be the old curmudgeon. We're all in our like little 10-second TikTokies. You really find the beauty of the long shot that just sort of like lets us live in the moment.
You know that you're aging yourself when you call them TikTokies. Talia, you're closing
with the youth.
I think that I'm grateful I watched this movie. I don't think I would have found my way to it if you had not said this is the movie we're watching.
And I hope you guys come back as we continue our exploration of films from 1974. On our next show, John Wayne was barely ambulatory in 1974, but he was still well enough to kick some ass. He plays the titular character in the cop thriller McHugh from director John Sturges, and that's the next film up for discussion on the No Name Cinema Society. Before that, I think these guys want to say farewell. Say goodbye to the audience, guys.
Bye.
This was a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this 83rd meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.
Step right up, hurry, hurry, before the show begins.